Most history textbooks teach a simple story about the transatlantic slave trade. They tell you European ships pulled up to West African beaches and snatched millions of people off the coast. But that story is dead wrong. The real engine of this global trade was not on the ocean. It was running deep inside Africa, hundreds of miles away from any sea. In the year 1804, in what is now northern Nigeria, a political and religious firestorm exploded across the savannah. This conflict created an industrialized supply chain of human beings. But inside this terrifying system, one man found an impossible way to fight back. His name was Ali Eisami. He did not use a weapon. He used his mind. This video accompanies Chapter 9 of Sand, Clay, and Iron, Africa's journey from the Stone Age to the dawn of European colonization. If you'd like to follow along, pick up your copy at the link below. We usually picture the transatlantic slave trade as a coastal phenomenon. Ships anchored just offshore, loading captives directly from the beach. But the true engine of this global economy operated hundreds of miles away, deep in the 19th century Nigerian interior. In 1804, a massive religious and political conflict known as the Sokoto Jihad ignited across the central Sudan. These wars transformed the region into a capture zone. Armies didn't just fight for territory, they acted as a procurement system, seizing thousands of prisoners of war to be sold. The European ships on the coast represented the final link in a sprawling supply chain, fueled by this inland political instability. Let's break down how this system actually functioned. The Sokoto Jihad was led by Usman dan Fodio, a Fulani Islamic scholar who overthrew the Hausa city-states. This was not just a local war. It reshaped an area larger than Western Europe. Cavalry units clad in quilted cotton armor poured across the dry savannas of the central Sudan. Behind these armies came private merchants armed with European flintlock muskets known as Dane guns. War was no longer just about conquest. War became a commercial enterprise. Captives were converted into a new form of currency. They traded these people for imported goods like cowrie shells. This created a self-reinforcing cycle. More captives bought more guns. More guns captured more people. One of those prisoners was Ali Eisami, a Kanuri man captured during the height of the Sokoto conflict. Isami's survival is significant because he documented his journey, providing a detailed account of the interior as he was moved toward the coast. He was forced into the relay trade, a network engineered to move human cargo across vast distances through a series of handoffs for the people trapped in this system. The primary challenge was survival, maintaining a sense of self in a supply chain that treated individual identity as a liability. Isami's narrative follows this path from the inside, mapping the specific mechanics of the human markets he navigated. To understand the horror of this journey, we have to look at who Ali Eisami was before his capture. He was born in the Bornu Empire, a sophisticated Islamic state near Lake Chad. Isami was an educated man, a scholar who could read and write Arabic. In 1808, invading Fulani forces shattered his hometown of Gazargamo. Overnight, an educated scholar was reduced to property. But how does a human being survive when an entire economic machine is designed to erase their identity? Modern psychologists call it cognitive resistance. Isami devised a secret mental calendar, a system so precise that not even years of horrific march could destroy his sense of time or self. But to keep that calendar alive, he had to survive the deadly gauntlet of the relay trade. Isami was sold multiple times on his journey south. He was moved in stages with each transaction, adding a layer of profit for the middlemen involved. The interior was divided into strict ethnic trade zones. Groups like the Yoruba, Hausa, Edo, and Fan controlled specific geographic corridors, ensuring that no single merchant could dominate the entire route. Captives moved in a relay from one zone to the next, often held for weeks at temporary hinterland ports until the next handoff was arranged. Wholesale buyers and merchant guilds, such as the Parakoy, managed these transfers, purchasing captives directly from the local armies. The incentives for war were purely economic. Local warlords typically claimed 60 to 80% of all captives taken in battle, selling them to merchant guilds to finance further military operations. The relay trade functioned as a compartmentalized economy that monetized human displacement at every border. Notice how calculated this mechanism was. The relay trade operated like a modern logistics network with specialized regional hubs in the northern savannas. Hausa traders managed the first leg of the march. Once captives crossed into the tropical forest belt, they were handed over to Yoruba brokers in cities like Oyo-Il. Here, merchant guilds like the Parakoy operated as powerful trade cartels. Captives were not just marched empty-handed. They were forced to carry 60-pound loads of palm oil, ivory, and imported Manchester cotton on their heads across hundreds of miles of terrain. This doubled the profit for the broker. If a captive collapsed from exhaustion under these brutal loads, they were simply abandoned along the jungle tracks. Each border crossing required a new currency exchange, swapping cowrie shells for iron rods or brass bracelets. By turning the interior into a patchwork of strict trade zones, no single kingdom could control the entire pipeline. This compartmentalization meant captives constantly lost their ability to speak the local language every few hundred miles, deepening their isolation and disorientation. This is where Isami's genius reveals itself. The system tried to strip away his name, his culture, and his humanity. To defeat this, Isami built an unbreakable mental timeline anchored to the natural world. He tracked his own age and the timeline of his journey by anchoring his memory to major celestial and environmental events. He remembered graduating from school at 11, followed 2 years later by a solar eclipse, which swept across the central Sudan when he was 13 years old. He paired this astronomical event with the devastation of the great locust swarms that destroyed the sorghum crops in Bornu shortly after. When his captors forced him through foreign markets where he could not speak the language, he silently recalculated his age against these immovable environmental markers. He knew that while men could buy and sell his body, they could not own the sun or the stars. This internal chronometer allowed him to keep his identity completely intact across 5 years of captivity. By 1820, Isami finally reached the coast. At this moment, the port of Lagos was seeing a surge in slave exports, a direct result of the same inland wars that had captured Isami years earlier. On the coast, demand was high, but the supply was entirely dependent on a fractured interior pipeline that spanned the continent. Lagos functioned as the point of export for a system powered by the displacement and conflict happening deep in the interior. When Isami reached Lagos in 1818, he was loaded onto a French slave ship, bound for the Americas. But his story took an extraordinary turn. The ship was intercepted at sea by the British Royal Navy's anti-slavery squadron, and Isami was liberated and brought to Sierra Leone. There, he met Sigismund Koelle, a German linguist working for the Church Missionary Society. Because Isami had preserved his memory and native Kanuri language with meticulous precision, he dictated his autobiography and helped compile the first comprehensive grammar of the Kanuri language. Today, his narrative stands as one of the most vital primary sources in African history. Ultimately, the slave trade failed to erase Ali Eisami. His memory survived as a testimony, documenting the localized mechanics of a trade that many historians once viewed only from the perspective of the ships. His account shows that the transatlantic trade was not just a maritime business, but one that relied on a devastating and highly organized inland infrastructure. Isami's journey serves as a record of human resilience, showing how individual agency can persist within oppressive economic networks. It proves that enslaved people were not passive victims of a distant shipping industry. They were analysts and survivors of a complex global network.